Ready to buzz the tower of neuro-inclusion? I'm James Hollis, proud autistic voice and Top Gun devotee, here with my co-pilot,
James Kenyon, your ADHD host from Northeast England. Welcome to the NeuroPod, soaring through the skies of neurodivergence, from autism to ADHD, with real stories and tips for parents, allies, and anyone navigating a neurotypical world.
We're wrapping up now our primary school. This final episode dives into my last year at prep school, from clashing with teachers to winning over, finally, the cool kids, all while masking my autism before being shipped off to boarding school.
Expect raw chats. Perfect for everyone curious about neurodivergence. Subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Enter the NeuroPod, all one word, or catch our clips on YouTube. Please share our neurodivergent positivity, and let's close this final chapter with Maverick at his last years at primary school. So, James, you've taken us through your years at primary school, and I think we should also clarify for our discerning listeners that you did in fact attend private school. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Excellent, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure for our Marxists in the audience that they weren't under any misapprehensions. What I wanted to ask you, James, was you've told me that there was a confrontation with a teacher and that she pulled you aside after your classmates criticised you. Can you tell me exactly what happened and just walk us through that?
Yeah, so basically I still had my imaginary world, which was very vivid, but it was getting to a point, of course, coming to the end of primary school when teachers felt like you're about to go off now to secondary school and you need to now behave like an adult. So it got to a point where my particular teacher in question took me aside after school, in fact, when all the other classmates had all left and gone home. And she really laid into me and said, this is not normal behavior. You've got to take responsibility now. You're going to secondary school. You've got to make an impression. You're behaving like a juvenile. It's time for you to grow up, yada, yada, yada. So that was a really hard experience because, of course, this sort of imaginary world was quite a sanctuary for me.
Was there a specific thing that triggered her off with this? Do you know?
I don't think so. I think it was an accumulation of a number of years of me living, so to speak, in my own world. I think she had some quite dated views when it came to how 12-year-old boys should be behaving. So in that regard, it was a case of her trying to do the right thing. I think it was more of a case of, it was a release of that pent-up frustration on her part in my direction.
So she called your behavior, quote unquote, not normal. How did you feel being labeled as not normal by an adult when you were around 10 or 11?
Well, I didn't take it particularly well. I found it also very, very hurtful in the sense that it was an attack, which it clearly was, no matter how you look at it. And if I ever had this conversation with her now at my age, she would probably say, no, it wasn't meant to be an attack, but it was. If the tone and the way she approached it, it made me sort of feel inadequate, made me feel broken. It made me feel like that there was something wrong with me, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what was wrong with me because I had the issue when it came to making friends, and you could argue in this context, in her view, normal friends, but it was an attack on sort of the world that I had created to help me cope with the real world, so to speak.
Do you think, or did you sense at the time or since, that she saw your autism as being part of what was not normal, even though you may not have had a diagnosis at the time?
Yes, certainly, because this was an area which, and even today, if you ask individuals, anyone out there, could you describe autism? What is it? I mean, these days, people would also find it very difficult to arrive at a definition. So when we're talking back in the 1990s, by this stage, I believe it was 2000 by this stage, but actually the year 2000, because I remember I went off to secondary school in 2001. There was no chance that they could put a label to this. The label they attribute to me was strange, juvenile, needs to grow up. You're an adult now, take responsibility. And I think the most hurtful of all was, why can't you just be like everybody else? But I didn't want to be like everybody else in one sense, because I kind of got accustomed to this way of living. And as I said, it was a sort of sanctuary for me and a protective layer against what was quite a difficult and threatening world as I perceived it at the time.
Right. So I wanted to ask you, you've had this by any stretch of the imagination, quite hurtful words spoken over you, as it were. What happened after she'd said this? How did you respond? Did you carry on as you were before? Did you internalize it? Or did you take some other radical action?
Well, that's quite a loaded question there, James, because we've already discussed this. But for our listeners and for the benefit of our listeners, what I did was when I went away from that dressing down, as in when I'd been thoroughly berated by a teacher who, by the way, at the time, I had regarded as someone who, as a rule follower, I was actually, that I didn't actually deserve this treatment. Something in me snapped and I decided, okay, following the rules is not actually making my life any better. So I took the view that I should go to the other extreme. And that other extreme was actually to become part of the loudest group in the class.
So you became part of the loudest group in the class. And how did that change how others saw you and perceived you, both your classmates and maybe your teachers?
First of all, I had to go through a form of initiation. I mean, when we say initiation, our listeners shouldn't be worried about what I'm about to say next. It was just a case of, can we trust you to keep secrets from the teachers? And which I was very able to do, because that was like that was a rule within the group, and I was used to following rules and said, right, these are the rules of the group and make sure you keep to them. And when I meant secrets, I mean, we were causing trouble, then I was someone who was very happy to keep things under wraps and ensure that the teachers didn't find out about the mischief that we were getting up to.
Okay, so can you leading on from what Captain Mainwaring would describe as these public school antics, can you describe a time, maybe specifically, if there was almost like an initiation prank or something like that, when you felt part of the sort of like the group, as it were?
There was this one time when I remember we were in, I think it was in Latin class, and one of the members of the group suddenly got into real trouble with the teacher there, and I was sitting next to the guy in question, and I just started laughing and snickering. To which the teacher was really shocked, because he didn't expect me to behave like this. Like, it was as if James has now seemed to have switched sides. He's no longer on the side of me, the teacher. He's on the side of the unruly squad. So I started laughing, and to which he said, "Oh, do you find something funny, James?" And to which I responded, "No, sir, not at all. And I just couldn't help it." He said, "Well, why didn't you stand outside in that case, and maybe come back in when you've composed yourself?" And I said, "No worries, not a problem, sir, will do." And I got up and I just walked out of the class. And at that stage, I felt like, so that felt good, actually, compared to what I'd experienced before when it came to teachers.
Yeah, that must have been a bit of a culture shock for them to see you cast as the rebel, quote unquote. Did you join switching sides? Did that feel like the real you, or was it more just to show that you were normal, quote unquote, or you weren't a loner?
I feel that it was, in a sense, I was putting on a bit of an act, fair to say, but that's because I was reacting against what I saw as a perceived injustice on the part of those who I had actually, through my good behavior, who I'd seen I had been supporting. And so as a result of that, I said, well, do whatever it takes now in order to make sure that you make a point, I guess. And this was my way of sort of making a point. And it was great to suddenly have friends who I never thought could be friends before. And then sort of when I always remember in those final 6 months at primary school, one of them said, we had hung out more often. You're a kind of cool guy to be around.
Yeah. And I mean, how did that make you feel when he said that?
Oh, amazing. It was amazing, because you feel a sense of acceptance suddenly, which I didn't feel before. The imagined world that I had, but I didn't really lean on anymore, because as I sort of alluded to in a previous episode, I didn't feel like I needed to, because I had a real world which I could connect with, and real people, which made so much of a difference. And one of the best parts, I remember, we talked about that one incident in the classroom, but there was another time where we went on a school trip, which was sort of like a goodbye for those who were leaving on and moving to secondary school. We went on a school trip to France, and we were in a coach. And of course, the back of the bus is where all the loud, unruly kids are sitting. And guess who was on that seat right at the back?
Who was right on that seat at the back?
It was, of course, yours truly. I was sitting there with all of the unruly kids. So it was great, because you felt like, you're sitting right at the back and you feel accepted. You feel you're part of the group, and you feel dare I say it, normal. But normal, if I can use that word, of course, we're going to use that word a couple of times, but that's just to describe what the teachers regarded as was not normal as far when they regarded me as a person.
But I wanted to come back to that because it's very interesting. You said it earlier on that you felt almost that you were a little bit putting on an act, but by virtue of putting on this act, you sort of became accepted. What was the, was there an internal, I don't know, tension or anything like that going on, or what was going through your mind at that point?
I can't really think of any particular instances which I regarded as a sort of tension within myself when it came to my character and how I was acting out. But I think if there was any, I would have to say there were certain ways I had to talk, which I know wouldn't usually talk, and maybe even, dare I say it, use words I would not usually use, talk about things that becoming new teenagers are talking about. It's not sort of subject matter that I would have used it to explore and discuss. But of course, because I was in the group, I had to also play my part in order to become a successful and accepted member of that group.
One of the things that you said earlier on was also the fact that to be almost initiated into this cool group, you had to sort of like say that you would keep secrets from teachers. And did any of that manifest itself on the trip to France?
I can tell you with confidence, and that's full disclosure by that, I don't really remember what those instances were. I want to guarantee listeners that there was no illegality involved or anything like that. It was just something if the teachers found out, they would be just really annoyed with us. But I remember when one of the lead members of the group turned around and said, okay, we're going to do this, but really, James, you mustn't tell anyone about this. And to which I responded, said, obviously not. Well, you don't need to tell me that. That's a given that I would never tell on you guys. That goes without saying. And I knew that I had to say that in reply because I wanted to still be not just a member of the group, but also an active member of the group and actively involved in whatever mischief they were up to.
Yes, of course, your co-conspirators, as it were. So that trip, that cemented you into the cool group, as it were, in your primary school. And you had to sit this, the common entrance exam, which I think is for private secondary schools. I mean, this acceptance socially, did that actually have a knock-on effect on your academic performance or in your confidence and your self-esteem?
Undoubtedly, James, my performance in those common entrance exams was particularly noteworthy because now I felt like I had proper friends. I think because I had a real feeling of acceptance, and I felt that there were some great friends that I had made, albeit it was right at the end of my time at primary school. I think that really had a knock-on effect as far as my self-confidence and self-esteem were concerned. And as a result of that, I feel that really inevitably helped me perform in all subjects, included the dreaded M-word mathematics. I did well enough to be able to then go on and get accepted into a good school based in West Sussex.
You said that you thought you might have been almost subconsciously masking or camouflaging your autism, particularly when you've been accused of not being normal by one of your teachers. I mean, was there a moment that you did feel, despite being admitted into this cool group and supposedly being accepted as normal and what have you, did you feel there was a moment where you were hiding your true self?
So I think that there were various behaviors which I acted out which were at odds with the core identity. So, for example, I would be in a situation where the cool kids would want to talk about areas where I would not be so keen on talking about, like, for example, they were getting into talking about the opposite sex. And that's something I felt slightly awkward about discussing. They all talked about things and they all laughed about various things about sort of girls who they were getting to meet and things like that. And that's around the age where you do get interested in, boys start getting interested in the girls and girls starting getting interested in the boys. And I probably just laughed along, but I never really so it looked as if I was engaged, but I wasn't as engaged because it's not an area that I was very keen on really talking a great deal about, because it's something I felt slightly awkward about because it involved a lot of talk about relationships and relations with others, which was something which I, for some reason at the time, I didn't know why, felt slightly awkward about going into any detail about as far as that and feelings in general were concerned.
And I think that's one of the things we're going to be discussing in our future episodes in terms of relationships. But we'll park that to one side just for the moment. Talking about the masking, now I think you said you'd overheard, or I don't know whether you'd overheard or been present when your parents and your teachers have been talking about your differences, and maybe that did they think possibly after this change, after you sort of joined this group and all that sort of thing, did they perhaps think you were just growing up, and did they miss the autistic things? Did you sense those conversations going on around you?
I didn't sense a particular lively discussion going on around me when it came to my particular traits, apart from the one when they were discussing with my parents about the possibility of me having a mental health condition. But one of the things I would say is that when it comes to masking, I think this was a classic example where, because I was so involved in a particular loud group of people, or loud group of boys in this case, I was well and truly camouflaged, so that in that regard, it would have been pretty much impossible to pick up on any traits of autism, or for that matter, it would have been very difficult to pick up on any other neurodivergent traits that a young boy would have had, because it would have looked as if, on the face of things, that young boy was actually doing quote unquote normal things, boys being boys, so to speak, when actually he was using that group, so to speak, to feel accepted, to become what he saw as an acceptable version of a 12 or 13-year-old, when in fact all he was trying to do was trying to just become accepted, react against what he saw as injustice which had been displayed to him, despite the fact he was following the rules and doing his best by the teachers and by the school rules as he saw it. So I think that it would have been very difficult for them to spot it as a result. And all my parents would have heard, and as they did hear, was, yeah, James he's being a bit disruptive at the moment, but he spends time with these friends of his who he's got close with recently. And they would have thought, well, you shouldn't be disruptive in class. Well, that's sort of normal at that sort of age. And that's what we'd expect a sort of 12, 13-year-old boy to behave.
Now, you got into your first choice boarding school, Hurst College, thanks particularly to your parents helping you with the tuition, is that right to say? And how did that feel when you were finishing primary school and you were heading off to quote unquote big school?
Well, I think I still remember that day when I was called into the headmaster's office, because he had received all of the acceptance or indeed rejection letters. They did it by surname and alphabetically. And then I was called and said, right, headmaster's ready to see you. And then I went in. I remember walking to his office and my heart was like beating out of my chest because I was so nervous. And then I walked in and he turned around to me and he said, I have a letter here from, I said Hurst College. Actually, it's called Hurst College now. It's actually, back then it was called Hurst Pierpoint College. And he sort of turned around to me and he said, so James, just to say, I've received a letter from Hurst Pierpoint, and they said they've considered all of your exam results and your performance, and as a result of your good performance in your common entrance exams, they would be delighted to welcome you as a pupil to the college starting in September. And I remember feeling at the time an amazing sense of achievement, because if I look back on it, it was like it was all cramming at the last minute, actually, because if I had done those common entrance exams a year or two before, I would have been toast. But it was in the last year or so where I got additional tuition outside of school in mathematics. I had a great extra maths teacher. She was fantastic and she really supported me, so much so that my maths results were pretty good. Okay, they weren't the best, obviously, but they were pretty good. They're good enough so that Hurst College took the view it's good enough, it meets our standards. Okay, and of course because I had other subjects also which I had also improved my performance in, they decided, especially when it came to languages, they decided, yeah, he's good, he meets all the standards. So that was a really great feeling, and I remember it to this day.
Yeah, you must have felt pretty elated considering you'd had in some ways quite a difficult time at primary school.
Yes, it was. And I really feel like there was a real sense of I can actually achieve in life. Because before that, as I mentioned previously, there was a sense of, do we need to write James off in terms of his future at such a young age? And it hit really hard as far as my parents were concerned, because, imagine having this discussion, for parents having this discussion about, are we having to write our son off or son or daughter indeed off at such a young age? And when that acceptance letter came through, first of all, it answered the question, no, you don't. He is not to be written off. He's got a future. And for me, it gave me a sense of, if you put your mind to it, you can actually achieve things despite what anybody else may be saying about you, despite what the naysayers may be saying. You know, there are still things you can do if you just ignore them and you just focus unrelentingly on your goals and objectives.
So that was your watershed, really, in lots of ways.
Yes, absolutely. That was the key watershed.
Well, James, I think that's a really inspirational way to wrap up this particular Maverick Odyssey, from your clashes with your teacher to your bus triumphs. And we talked about masking behaviors and a bit of troublemaking. But is there a particular one final thing that you want the listeners to take away with about your primary school experience and your primary school years on neuroinclusion? I mean, we've asked this in our previous episodes as well, but is there anything else? Is there anything final you'd like to say?
Well, I think what I'd like to put out there is, when it comes to my own experience of going from one extreme to the other, from the extreme of being sort of a rule follower, best behaving class, to suddenly going to the next extreme, which was being part of the troublemakers, what I would say is, I would sort of put it out there and ask teachers whether they have any experiences of something similar happening over the years with any of their pupils. Did they used to be very quiet and reserved, and suddenly they joined they joined the naughty class, or they joined the naughty group, and to maybe try and look beyond what they may be thinking about what it actually is, and sort of think maybe there's more to this. Maybe there is a neurodivergence hiding there somewhere, which we've overlooked, which has led to this huge swing from what they were to where they are now, as far as being part of the mischief maker is concerned.
Well, that's a perfect summation. Thank you very much, James. It's been quite a tour de force, and we've much appreciated your relating what have been at times quite difficult experiences and probably quite difficult memories. So I wanted to say finally that if you're listening to this podcast and what you've been hearing resonates with you, please subscribe to the NeuroPod, all one word, which is on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or you can catch our exclusive YouTube clips as well. So be alert, not be warned, because that wouldn't be good, but be alert the fact that our Neuro Odyssey continues from fine city of Liverpool to platform 9 3/4 and beyond. And so please share this podcast to spread neurodivergence positivity.
Thank you, listeners, for joining our mission, and let's keep soaring like Maverick. Bye-bye.
Cheerio.